Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 552.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the CashFlow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other CashFlow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you are here today because we are going to talk about a lot of different things. And one of the things that we are going to hit on today, I believe a number of us are going to, we're going to learn something. And we're going to learn something from a few different people as we continually go through this particular series. But we're also going to become bigger, better, better investors, business owners, and just people along the way. So one of the things that I've thought about, and maybe you have thought about too, is, man, how much do I have to learn? Where can I learn what I need to learn? What do I have to do? What if you are just now getting started in business and you're like, man, I'd like to get started, 5 figures. Great. Awesome. Then you want to get to 6, then to 7, then to 8 and continuing. But there are some things that I know that I have learned on this path that, I didn't know that I didn't need to know them. And a lot of it has to do with formal education. So we're going to talk about some of the things that our guests have learned that formal education could have never taught them on their path to 7 figures. And what's interesting is the diverse group of individuals who have many different lessons to share. Now, today, we're going to be talking with Lief Simon. He's the co-founder and investment director of Live and Invest Overseas, which the title alone of the company should kind of tell you exactly what he does. He lives and invests overseas. Now, overseas, as we continue to talk, means outside of North America, because in general, they are investing overseas. So for those of you who might be in a completely different country, adjust accordingly. Now, here's the thing. He's been doing this for 20 years. That's 2 decades. That's a long time. That means he's forgotten more about his business than we could even learn. But what's going to be cool is we're going to get to learn not only about his path, his journey, we're also going to learn some good lessons about living and investing overseas. So right now, I want you to get ready to welcome, listen, love, and learn from Lief Simon. Lief, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thanks for having me.
I am glad that you're here because I've got some great questions for you. I'm interested in this, living and investing overseas. I'm actually kind of glad that my wife's not listening right now because she's been trying to get me out of California for quite some time. So I know that there's a lot that you're going to say that she's going to be like, see, I told you. And I'm going to have to do my best to just make sure she never hears this particular episode so I can stay in California, unless you convince me otherwise, which I guess is possible. Now, with all that being said, this is like your first time here with us. So I have to ask you a very similar question I tend to ask everybody else. You ready?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. I tend to think that today's entrepreneurs are a lot like yesterday's superheroes. You know, Batman, Robin, Hulk, Spider-Man, etc. And because I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. For example, as an entrepreneur, occasionally I can envision myself running around town and maybe in a cape and tights at that moment, but I'm selling my product and saving customers one sale at a time. Also, though, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. And if you think about Spider-Man, there was a time he was just a kid going to school, doing his thing. And then one day he wakes up, discovers he's got a superhuman ability, and he has to choose whether to use it for good or for evil. So my question to you is as follows. Before living and investing overseas, before the Simon Letter, before the Offshore Living Letter, before everything that people know you for today, like even before you left the U.S., what we want to know is, who is Lief Simon?
That's a tough one. I couldn't tell you who Lief Simon is today, even probably. But in the States growing up, I mean, I knew in high school that I was interested in doing stuff international. Of course, I didn't at 14. I didn't know what that meant. But I grew up in Phoenix, and fortunately, the American Graduate School of International Management, Thunderbird, they've changed their name, they're now merged with ASU, was just a few miles away from my high school, and someone told me about it. And so that was kind of my goal from high school. Once I got my undergrad degree, to go to grad school and get an international management degree. Again, didn't know what that was, probably still didn't really know what that was after I graduated. But the opportunities that came out of that degree were the recruiters that came to that school, because it has been ranked for a long time the best, and is still one of the best international management schools. So that was kind of my path from the beginning. I couldn't tell you how the pieces fell together exactly for eventually being able to move overseas 21 years ago. But that was kind of how I started, and organically put everything together and met my wife, and made my first permanent move. I'd worked overseas before, but my first permanent move 21 years ago when we moved to Ireland.
Got it. Okay, so hold on. There's a lot we covered. I've got to ask a backup question. You said
Sure.
you were you knew that you wanted to do something internationally at the age of 14?
Yeah.
How on earth? Nobody at 14. I mean, like, what were you doing that you go, ooh, somewhere outside of the U.S.? Like, help me understand.
I guess my brain figured that there are better, different, new opportunities outside of the U.S. And I living in Phoenix, drove down to Nogales a couple times a year to buy things on the other side of the border, do negotiating, and pick up some Spanish, etc. And the other part that I knew about myself, I get bored easily. So I knew I didn't want a career in accounting, which I could have had. I worked for an accountant in high school and college. They offered to pay for my my university. But my God, if I had to sit in an office all day for 30 years, I'd have to kill somebody. So I knew I knew some of the things I didn't want. The accounting background has helped me with my, along with my finance degree, to understand numbers and do what I do today. But I wasn't going to sit in an office. And so I guess that was part of the connection there.
Interesting. I just think you're displaying an incredible amount of self-awareness at a very young age.
Thank you.
Now you mentioned degrees. I'm curious to understand, because as we get to one of the next questions I want to ask, this is going to be really important. How many? It sounded like there was a lot of formal education that you've gone through.
I have a finance degree as my bachelor, and the international management degree for my master's, which eventually they converted to an MBA. Originally it was called an MIM, Master's of International Management, but when they got accreditation, they were able to switch those over to MBAs. But of course, everybody has an MBA these days, and so I don't put much credence in letters after people's names. I know more about accounting and taxes than most CPAs, and partially that's because U.S. taxes are so complicated that doing taxes in the U.S. you have to focus. Right, I went through the process, but even in my accounting classes, I was working for an accountant at the time. I kind of laughed at some of my accounting teachers because the stuff they were and the way they were teaching it was not how we did it in the real world in the office.
Right. There is such a difference between the classroom and the place where the work is actually supposed to get done. And it's interesting because one of my oldest is currently in college, and I've always thought it was interesting that you go to college for the time you go, and then like day one on the job, the first thing they do is to train you how to do the job. And
right.
I'm like, that's just interesting to me. I've like, isn't that what I was supposed to be learning? So now then the question then becomes, because this is, again, as we go through this series, I love hearing the answer. What we really would love to know is like, what are the top things that, formal education could have never taught you, but lessons that are absolutely critical and have been critical on your path to seven figures and beyond?
Well, I guess for me, we have to jump ahead to when I moved overseas and started investing in real estate internationally.
Okay.
And the the one thing, and this is what I try and tell our readers and conference attendees about, when you're looking for real estate, and with the internet these days, it's easier to find real estate offerings online. But if you're looking at a real estate listing in English for a property in, let's make up a country, Peru, you're probably looking at the most expensive property of that type, that size, in that neighborhood, because it's in English and it's on the internet. So that's the one lesson of any market that I go into for real estate, is you need to drill down to get to the local pricing, and away from the gringo pricing. A friend of mine, business partner of mine, moved to Costa Rica, and it tells the story. When he first moved to Costa Rica, he knew about gringo pricing, and he spent a year looking at land and drilling and digging and trying to figure out the market, and finally bought a piece of property. He thought he'd reached the local level. The next year, he continued to look for more property. He found a better property for a cheaper price. The next year, he found yet another property at a cheaper price, and probably by that third year is when he actually reached the local pricing. So the easier something is in looking for real estate, the higher price, just like anything else. If you're buying a bottle of water from the guy on the corner, you're going to pay a premium over what you pay in the cheap grocery store that you normally go to.
So that first offer probably isn't their best offer. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I'm not opposed to making an offensive offer, although sometimes the real estate agents are, because they don't want to be tagged as such. But right, it's like negotiating for anything, really. I guess we just got back from China and had to teach the other people that were on the trip with us. You got to start out at, in this case, as little as 20-30% of what they're offering you, and maybe you end up at 50% of what they're offering you. If you only go 80% and end up at 90%, they're making twice as much money as they would with a local.
No doubt.
This is for trinkets, of course, but the concept does carry over to real estate, especially in many Latin American markets. And the farther you are away from a more standardized market, like if you're in Panama City, where I live, you can. You know what prices are and what things sell for in different neighborhoods and different buildings. But if you're looking for, land in the hills, you've really got to dig down to see what the locals are selling to each other at, and try and get that pricing.
Got it. Now, the interesting thing, I guess, here is, have you found this to be just a cultural thing? Because I know many of the Americans that are listening today are probably like, I do this to my wife all the time. She hates, I will go anywhere, everywhere, and always negotiate, even in the mall out here, because it's just fun. I just like doing it.
Right.
But it offends her. And I would imagine that most Americans, for sure, just don't do this. And yet it's almost expected everywhere else.
Well, exactly. If there's a price tag on something, Americans are happy to just pay that price if they think the price, if it's worth, while or whatever. But right, in many cultures, the negotiation is expected. In lots of real estate markets, including real estate markets in the U.S., there should be some negotiation, and it really depends on what the property is priced at. If a property is priced to move, then maybe there's as much as 5, 10, if you're lucky, 15% availability for negotiating. If it's priced at a ridiculous price, then maybe there's more space for negotiating, or maybe the people don't care and they've just priced it at that. And if they find a buyer who comes along to pay that ridiculous price, they'll sell. If not, they'll just sit on it, which is a big thing in markets where there's wealthy people who aren't carrying any debt on the property. So, they don't need to sell. They'll sell it at a premium if they can find a buyer, but otherwise they just hold on to things.
So have there been any other lessons in your life on the way to seven figures that you couldn't have learned that? Because last time I checked, there is no negotiating class in high school, college, anywhere. I was like, hey, they don't really teach it in that sense. So I'm curious to know what other lessons that you've learned on the path that formal education could not have taught you.
Well, the other thing, again, this is more of a cultural thing. Outside of the U.S., we recommend you use a real estate attorney to help you with the process, with the paperwork, with the contracts. And sometimes they know what the market is and can help you with pricing. But really, you want to make sure that you're using an attorney to verify that you're buying what you think you're buying. There are in the U.S. there's lots of safety nets, right?
Right.
You've got the title company, you've got the bank, because you're going to get a mortgage, and so everybody wants to be protected. Outside of the U.S., it's maybe, I guess free for all is probably too strong in most markets, but you're on your own. And even in Ireland, which English speaking civilized country, it's caveat emptor, as our first attorney there told us. And the first house we bought there, we wanted to have a home inspection. Well, that wasn't really a thing in Ireland, but they recommended a civil engineer who did inspections, and because an inspection wasn't mandatory by the bank. So, but we wanted one. The guy came, he went around the property. When he sent his report, it talked about the place would look better with different drapes, change the wallpaper. It was more of a fashion report than, oh, by the way, you have dry rot in your baseboards, which we did, but he didn't put that in the report. And so, use an attorney, use experts, but really you're on your own. So you want to use an attorney that is used to real estate transactions and doing real estate transactions with foreigners. And I've found great ones over the years in different countries. But when you're buying something, again, there are no safety nets. There's no home inspection required if you're getting a mortgage, which is possible in some countries. The banks aren't going to require the same things that are required in the U.S. And so you need to find those on your own. And where there's a lot of expats, you can find people who will offer and have the credentials to offer things like home inspections. But again, for us in Ireland, it was a guy who had a civil engineering degree, but was commenting on the decor, which is one reason I don't give credence to just because somebody has letters after the name, it doesn't mean they know what they're talking about.
I think that's the big lesson right there. Letters after your name don't necessarily mean you know what you're talking about. But here's the question, though. When thrown into in this case, foreign environment, often a very human response is to just be afraid. In fact, I know for a fact, someone listening to us right now got afraid and said to themselves, they immediately said, oh no, then I'm just not going to go overseas, based upon what little you said, because they got afraid.
Right.
I'm curious to know, how has your relationship with fear changed on your path to seven figures and beyond? Hello there, entrepreneur. This is Jay Massey. I know that if you've ever gone over to the site, CashFlowDiary.com, you may have asked yourself, where on earth do you get a domain name from? Especially as you are beginning to build your bigger, better, badder business, you need a web presence. You need the email address. You need a way for people to contact you electronically so that you can stop doing the @gmail.com game. Well, the good folks over at GoDaddy have definitely supplied us with every domain that we have ever used. So what I want you to do is I want you to go over to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, because it's a quick way for you to get set up to capture your domain name the exact way that you want it. They got easy search functions, and most importantly for you is that you'll be up and running today. As I said, once you get started, stay started. Don't let small little obstacles of how to get your own domain name going stop you. So again, go to trygodaddy.com/CashFlowDiary, and let's get back to the rest of the story.
I guess I would say I've always been a little more aggressive and not worried too much about things. On our second overseas purchase, the first was our house in Ireland. The second was an investment in Spain, and I was doing a research trip doing the entire southern coast of Spain,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up in a town called Estepona, which is in the it's near Marbella, and a developer had just launched this project. It was selling quickly, of course, that's what they were saying, but it was. I mean, I saw the sales reports, and the terms were great. The location was on the beach. Everything was perfect. And so I called up my wife and said, "All right, I want to do this deal." And she was like, "What are you out of your mind?" But she's moved to Ireland. She was into the international thing and all that, but she's like, "You're crazy." I'm like, "No, we'll leave, the deposit's refundable. We'll make the deposit. I'll come home, call an attorney, get the due diligence done." And eventually said, "Okay, if you want to do it, just do it." And basically don't say any more about it to her until it goes good or it goes bad, right?
Right.
And as it turns out, if I could repeat that deal every year or every 2.5 years, which was the turnover, it was a pre-construction deal. The developer sold the property for me before construction was completed, and I made an annualized return in the 38% range or whatever on the money that I'd put down over the 2 years as the down payment. And so I didn't. From me, I guess the fear part, the risk mitigation was the down payment wasn't much, and then I knew I could make the progress payments. And then eventually, if the property didn't sell, Spain was offering mortgages at that time to foreigners, so I could get a mortgage and then rent the place out. And so I think through worst case scenarios, I guess, and if I can live with the worst case scenario, then I'm happy to move forward. Many people, I guess, don't, they'd be less comfortable with that worst case scenario, or they don't think things through that far, and then decide to do nothing.
Well, I think there's an aversion to even want to consider that the worst case scenario is even possible. So it catches one unprepared, or has the ability to catch one unprepared, as opposed to at
Right.
least, I mean, even if you've had a bad plan, it's better than no plan.
Right.
So there was something in what you just said that I also want to make sure everyone heard, because you said Spain was offering mortgages to foreigners at that time, which implies that there are times where in international real estate that mortgages aren't offered to foreigners.
Yeah, absolutely. And so pre-2008, most places in Europe, the big countries, so Spain, France, Portugal, Ireland, the UK, you could get mortgages as a non-resident foreigner, someone who's not living there and or not earning your money in the country. You'd have to put more down than you would if you were living in the country. You're looking at maybe a 60 to 70% loan to value. After 2008, because so many people, especially Brits in Spain, were taking out mortgages, and the market just collapsed and people walked away from the properties. The Spanish banks were carrying way too many properties on their books, and they just stopped giving mortgages to foreigners, because their fear was the reality that they just lived through. But of course, they needed the foreigners to buy these properties to get them off their books. So eventually, they started loosening up again. And so in Spain, Portugal today, you can get mortgages as a non-resident foreigner. France, there's one bank that I've heard of that is giving loans, but France is still much more conservative since 2008 than the others. And in Latin America, if you can get a mortgage, you probably don't want it because the interest rates are going to be really high. Nicaragua, you can get a local mortgage if you're a resident, a foreign resident, but you're looking at double-digit interest rates. The same in Belize for the most part. Panama would be the only place where you could. Some banks are giving non-residents mortgages and foreign residents mortgages, and the interest rate is in the 6 to 7% range.
Now, I'm just curious, because you're bringing it up. Is there ever a time where, say, a bank in Panama will lend on something in Latin America, or something, or like further south, somewhere over there?
No, the banks generally aren't going to do that because they don't have the capacity to foreclose. right?
I see.
So they don't have the infrastructure. There's one bank. There's a small private bank in Belize that we know of that will give loans in Central America, and the way they structure it, you have to hold the property in a Belizean entity, and they hold the shares of the Belizean entity. So that's their safety mechanism. If you stop paying, then they already have the shares in their office.
Yeah, I see. Got it. So that's how they cover themselves, is what you're saying.
Right.
That makes sense. Seems like more people would want to try something like that in some way, shape, or form. But okay.
It's hard to match people up with those kinds of things. We have a group we work with in Colombia that matches investors up to foreign, well, actually to local buyers as well if they want, but to foreign buyers to offer private mortgages. Those terms are not going to be a 30-year amortization and a 95% LTV. You're looking at 50 to 60% LTV and maybe a 3 to 7 year maximum payment period. Maybe the amortization is on 30 years, but you're going to have a balloon at the end of 7 years. So for investors looking at a 5-year horizon, those kinds of things can make sense. Again, the interest rates even on that type of private loan in Colombia is still double digit, 10, 11, 12%.
So has there been anything, or let me rephrase, what has there been? What did you gain from your formal education that you would consider useful on the path to 7 figures?
For me personally, what I've been doing the last 15, 20 years in helping people find properties and compare opportunities is how to calculate an IRR, which drives my wife crazy because I at conferences I'm now forced to ask how many people in the room know what an IRR is, and 10% of the room will raise their hand. So then I have to explain it and explain why it's important. Because if you're a real estate investor and you buy a property as a rental and you start renting it out, well, your annual yield is your IRR excluding your appreciation. And so that's easy. But how do you compare other types of investments like forestry? So we talk about timber projects in Panama and Colombia and Nicaragua. And if teak, if you plant new teak today, you harvest it in 25 years.
Right.
And so you have 24 years of zero cash flow. How do you compare turning $50,000 into $1 million over 25 years into turning $50,000 into a cash flow that starts after 5 years for the fruit tree agriculture that we talk about, and then that cash flow continues for 30 years? How do you compare those two? You can't just total up the cash flows. You can't just divide by the number of years. You've got to go through the IRR calculation and see what that comes up with to have at least a fair basis for comparing them. And then you've got to look at, why are you making the investment? Do you need the cash flow? A lot of people do the long-term timber for, pay for the grandkids' college or legacy planning and things like that. So there are other factors, but you got to start with the financial basis.
Yes. What's interesting, it's funny that you mentioned the teak and timber, because I was actually thinking about that yesterday, because that's part of the plan. And I just don't know, do you always have to, can't you buy them midterm? Couldn't I buy one that's maybe 15 or 20 years in already?
You can, and we actually work with a group that has been doing that, and then they've sold out the plantation that they planted themselves, and they're buying another big plantation and carving it up. And so yes, you can, and then you've got a calculation to do there to see what the value is of the
net present value now is what what we would be doing at that point, right?
Exactly, and so, but yes, then there's still projection of what they would sell for in 10 years at that point if they're 15-year-old trees. And so, yes, you can find those kinds of opportunities. In fact, one of my friends, long-term friends now in Panama, who has a large teak plantation, he has some investors from 10, 15 years ago who bought the investment to get residency in Panama. They now have their permanent residency and their citizenship, and they no longer need to maintain the investment, so they're looking to sell. So you can find those opportunities on a secondary market.
Got it. So, all right. So now you're bringing up a number of different types of ways to still have real estate plays, which I love. which suggests to me, because again, people have asked me all the time, like, what type of investing do you do? And I'm like, I'm a cash flow person. What that means is that I am asset agnostic. I don't really care what the underlying asset is as much as I care about A, do I understand it? And B, does it eventually in some way produce cash flow? And I'm getting the sense that you're the same.
Yeah, definitely at this point, as I'm getting older. When I was younger, I was happy with the capital appreciation, like that pre-construction deal in Spain. But right now, I'm looking at since 2008, when the whole the global real estate world turned upside down. And everybody was a real estate investor in 2008. They tell a story about looking at property in Montenegro, and the real estate agent who was showing us around said, "Oh, we just had an Irish girl in last week looking at property. She's a hairdresser, and we walked into this one apartment, and she said, I love it. It's great. How much is it?" And she of course didn't know anything about the property other than she'd walked into it. She didn't know how many bedrooms, and that's not how you buy real estate. It's not. But that indicated to me at that time, and this was probably this must have been 2006, that the world, especially the Irish buyers, because they couldn't afford to buy in Ireland because of the bubble there, were now pushing themselves into other markets and just throwing money at anything, which made it harder for real investors, long-term investors like myself, to find good deals. And so then in 2008, 2009, we moved to Panama in 2008 and started Live and Invest Overseas. That's when I started looking at agriculture opportunities, and have found a few over the years. The problem with agriculture is that you can go, if you have $1 million, you can go buy land in Uruguay and hire a farm manager. But most people don't have $1 million to do that. And so trying to find things that are packaged, if you will, for individual investors hasn't been easy. We found a few. We're working with a group in Panama, a group in Thailand, and one in Europe. And then, the cash flow from that is long term. Fruit trees in Panama, once they start producing after year 4 or 5, will produce for 50, 60 years. We stop the projections at 30 years because after that the IRR curve flattens anyway, and you'll be dead. So it's for the kids.
That's definitely one way of looking at it, and I like it because this is something you're beginning to talk about, the alternative types of things that I enjoy personally. Now, I'm also curious to know, Live and Invest Overseas. Why start it? Why do it? What's it about? What on earth inspired? I mean, it sounded like to me you were already doing things that that were satisfying to you, but then you decide to offer more to the world.
Well, it's a bit of a complicated story, but my wife was working for a publishing company that talked about these ideas when we met. She ran a tour. We met on the tour. We got married. That company wanted to open an office in Ireland. We moved to Ireland, and I was going to do a real estate project there, but it turns out she needed help with the admin side of things. She's a writer, so she's great on the idea side, the writing side. My background, finance, administration, HR. So I helped her with each of those departments in the business setup, and then created the real estate investment publishing and opportunity side of things for that group. And then our daughter wanted to go to finish high school in Paris, so we moved to Paris. So we were in Ireland for 7 years. We were in Paris for 4 years, and then I left the company we were working for, and she left a year later. And she thought she was retiring. She, like me, gets bored easily. 3 months later, she said, "Hey, I want to start my own publishing company. Where should we do it?" So we looked around to where we should do that, what made the most sense. And Panama, the two top choices were Uruguay and Panama. Panama won for several reasons, including the fact that we knew it would be easier to find English-speaking employees in Panama than it would be in Uruguay. And since we were writing to an English-speaking readership, that's what we needed. And so that's how Live and Invest Overseas got created. It was an extension of what we had been doing previously for this publishing company, and just doing it a little bit better, we think, and a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. So when it comes down to it, what I am hearing is there are a lot of things that I believe that every investor, regardless of, country of origin, that we take for granted or assume based upon, hey, this is how it's done, and that's obviously just not the case. And
Right.
there seems to be a massive amount of information necessary in order to make what could feel like a simple decision in your own home country, but is actually completely different because you're learning over from the beginning. So my question, I guess, is, and I'm really curious, if someone listening right now wanted to try to do it the right way, and let's say that they were crazy enough and wanted to do it on their own, in your estimation, how long do you think it would take them to just make sure that they could figure out and do it the right way?
Well, that's. I'll tell you what it takes for me when I enter a new country.
Okay.
It's rarer and rarer that I end up doing that because I've already, researched and established connections in a lot of countries. But for example, Colombia, which I think was really the last new country where I went in and specifically was looking for an investment for myself and information for our readers. So but this is with experience of knowing the questions to ask and the type of people to find.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I do going into a country is look for a real estate attorney. And so an English-speaking real estate attorney that has experience with foreigners, if there is such a thing. In some countries, I found that it's very hard to find because, a country like Colombia, even the attorney we found, he had some experience, but at that point, Colombia hadn't attracted a lot of foreigners. And so to find an attorney, try and find an English-speaking real estate agent, if possible, especially in countries where I don't speak the language. I speak Spanish well enough that I found an English-speaking and a Spanish-speaking real estate agent in Colombia. Try and find a rental manager. That if you're buying to rent, if you're buying to live, that's a whole different topic. And again, if there is one, there's not rental managers available in many markets, especially if they're not already a tourist market where you would find short-term rentals. And so I think my wife and I, we made 3 trips of about a week each over the course of 4 to 6 months. And that created our initial baseline for the country. And then on the crazy side, but we've done this many times. So when we were ready to buy, we made appointments with the 2 real estate agents, saw various properties over the course of a couple of days, picked one, made an offer, and bought it. I wouldn't recommend that for most people. I think most people would freak out at that. But if you think you understand the market, and the main thing is when you're buying in a market like this, that you're buying, if you're buying a rental, that you're buying a rental property that will rent to the market that you want to rent to. Those are the real questions. That's why you want to find a property manager early on and ask them what properties do they need, what properties do they want, will they take on. We've had readers who have gone to Medellin and bought a property that they fell in love with, or properties the real estate agent said should rent well, and were disappointed in the rental yields because it was out of the zone for short-term rentals. So they had to rent long-term, and long-term rentals provide lower returns. So I'm kind of babbling at this point. So did I get to?
No, you proved my point, because one of the things that I've learned in helping entrepreneurs become bigger, better, badder entrepreneurs, there are many lessons that you can learn on your own, but sometimes it's not worth the expense of time, effort, energy, and having a guide always helps. And I was just curious because I knew that. Well, I know personally, and I can imagine the amount of experience that you've gathered you shortcut that process for a number of people. And if they have an interest in investing somewhere that is not their home country, they should track you guys down, which is a great opportunity for me to ask, if for those that have listened this far and want to find out more about what you guys are doing, what's going to be the best way for them to find you?
So our main website is liveandinvestoverseas.com. And there you can sign up for our free e-letter, get started, see some of our information. We have several free e-letters, including a real estate oriented one and an offshore topic oriented one. And then we also do events, but the free e-letter is the easiest way to just start seeing what we talk about and if it makes sense for you.
Excellent. Now, as we wind down, I've got a final question for you because I'm curious to hear your answer. I mean, especially given that not only you, but it sounds like your daughter just said, hey, I want to go to school in Paris, and you guys like up and moved. So this is going, I think your answer is going to be really interesting because of these things. So, there's a number of people listening who are at, various stages. And in the course of them listening to you and I today, they may have gotten to the place to where they're like, you know what, they're drawing that line in the sand. They're like, that's it. I'm doing it. Whatever it is for them. Sometimes it's starting a business. Sometimes it's, in your case, moving out of the country. There's probably at least a few people who have had that thought process. And now they're like, okay, that's it. Line in the sand. Now, like I know that when we come to those moments, I call them the precipice of decision, because when we're there, we're looking over the cliff and we have this companion. That companion is a voice. It's a voice that often reminds us of how it didn't work last time, and you're going to do what, and you're going to move where, and real estate, seriously? And for some people, they're related to that voice. So my question to you is as follows. Let's pretend that this time it's going to be different, Lief. This time they're going to do exactly what you say, and they're going to do so in the next 24 to 48 hours. What would you suggest that they do?
Oh, wow. Well, if we're talking about in investing in real estate overseas, which is the main thing I focus on, as opposed to just moving overseas, that's a whole another topic we can talk about some other time. In fact, my wife would be good for that topic. But investing in real estate, the main thing I would recommend if you're interested in diversifying your real estate portfolio beyond your home country is pick a country where you at least think, if you don't already know, that you'd like to spend time. I've found great real estate opportunities in crazy places. South Africa. Somebody wrote me about an agriculture project in some other African country. I couldn't tell you the name now. And yeah, the opportunity looked great, but I'm never going to visit. I'm never going to check on it. I'm never going to go, even if it's not a scam. It's a real thing. And it's just not worth it. But if you say you like Mexico, well, then start looking at the places that you like to spend time in Mexico and see if those real estate markets make sense for investment right now. If you like the idea of Colombia, or you like the idea of Belize or Portugal or whatever, then that's where I would start with your search, rather than looking on the internet and chasing the best marketing materials or the best yields that are being thrown out there. Look in the places that you're interested in spending time.
I love it 100%. And I can definitely throw my hat in the ring for Belize because it's just beautiful. Now, I definitely appreciate you guys doing what you do. And I like how you've done it, because it's one thing to create a company that talks about living and investing overseas. It's another to literally walk that walk and talk that talk. And you did so. You didn't do it because you wanted to create the company. You just did it because you were already doing that. And that speaks volumes about who you guys are and the integrity that is possible when finding the right guide. So I definitely want to be one of the first to say thanks for taking the time to share your knowledge, your wisdom, as well as your insight here with us today at the CashFlow Diary.
No problem, Jay. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means get over to liveandinvestoverseas.com. Why? Because, well, you know that there's a lot that you don't know. And that's probably one of the biggest things that you have learned in this particular episode. I mean, you've heard it said, what you don't know can't hurt you? I would say quite the opposite, because what you don't know can, has, and always will hurt you, especially if you try to do this investing outside of your home country on your own. And hey, worst case scenario, now you know what IRR means. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.